Opening words or closing words or what?
Opening and closing. Or chalice lighting and closing.
Beautiful.
That was wonderful.
The great turning. In these wild, historic, and uncertain times, we gather to remember who we are, who we belong to, and what we are called to do. As we light this chalice, we kindle the spirit of the great turning, the movement for justice alive in this nation today. May we feel it in our bones, and in the stillness of this hour, may we sense it calling our name.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion in NAUA circles about land acknowledgements. And while this says titled land acknowledgement, it's really not. What I'm going to do is an essay about land acknowledgement, slightly different, maybe a little bit more critical. It's generated much conversation. My aim is to point out some of the issues that are brought up, and I think they are worth considering, but I speak only for myself. Recognizing that the land and the environment can never be owned, we are simply the temporary custodians of these precious gifts, and many prior civilizations have lived and thrived here. We are thankful for the wisdom of those civilizations in being able to pass on this legacy to us. But all of the land acknowledgements I've heard seem to conflate two simple truths. First, the Europeans who came here and the way they displaced and abused the existing tribes is a stain on our country's history, and along with slavery, should never be forgotten. Truth two, yes, the environment was in much better shape when the native population was here, But there are a few things that have changed since then and never seem to be mentioned. First, human population has more than quadrupled. If an acre of land can support 1,000 humans indefinitely, it will not be able to do so when the stress of millions fills that same space. I think it is probably the major culprit in the degradation of the environment, not just here, but worldwide. Another unspoken element is the land acknowledgement sermons is the fact that since the Indian population was displaced, the era of fossil fuels and consumption, excuse me, has risen from near zero to its current levels. Rather than compare the environment of those ancient people with today, overlooks a few other points which I think are important. Native Americans did not have to cope with trains, planes, automobiles, and resultant use of fossil fuels. But with those, it seems one of the purposes of these acknowledgments, and that's left out, is to make us feel guilty. I believe that in those I've heard, there is an effort to picture Native Americans as godlike figures who, and I quote from one I've repeatedly heard week after week, and they lived here peacefully for thousands of years in peace while tending the lands. One might ask, from whom did they take the land? Like the rest of humanity, they did their best to cope. But the idealization bordering on sainthood is inappropriate. Indian wars occurred. Some Native Americans were good and kindly people, but surely some were not. Like all who came before, they simply did the best they could. Rather than spend our time wringing our hands in guilt, wouldn't it be far more productive to work to save the earth? We're the only humans with the capacity to destroy it. I suggest we don't obsess on the past. Let's all just try to make things better.
Thanks, Bob. I think it's now time for the opening song, and feel free to sing along, but make sure you're muted first, okay? Now I got to share my screen. Okay.
Do I have to mute again?
Yes, please mute.
Okay.
So hi everyone. Some of you we've met a week or two ago and some not. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. My name is Julian Adorney, and I'm the founder of a Substack movement called Heal the West that focuses on preserving our liberal social contract against the threats of left-wing extremism, which is what we're talking about here, right-wing extremism, and also toxic polarization, because I think that toxic polarization can pull us apart at the seams sometimes. And so ultimately, what I kind of write about is how to combat those three threats and how to have courage, like the courage it takes to stand up in our culture of censoriousness, in our culture of walking on eggshells, in our culture that says you have to agree with me or be silent. What does it take for us to actually stand up and combat those three threats and get back to the thriving liberal social contract that we all really want, a world of shared prosperity and racial harmony, essentially. And so that's kind of what I'm honored to be speaking about to you guys today. Today we're going to be talking about courage. And so I want to start by deeply commending you for your courage. When he first messaged me to talk about giving this talk, Roy said that you're a breakaway group from the Unitarian Universe Association, which has bought into critical theory and anti-racism, and which has insisted, as happens unfortunately in so many critical theory circles, that those were the only ethical principles. It's critical theory or the highway. It's anti-racism or the highway. And I realized that sometimes churches can divide or fracture over small things. In the Christian church, for instance, of which I'm a member, I've heard of churches splitting over issues like whether or not to allow dancing, whether or not to play hymns versus new electric guitar, and each side insisting the other side is reading the Bible inaccurately. Those splits can, over trivial stuff, can reinforce the world's interpretation of us as fractious and divided. But they're also important splits. Sometimes you need to stand up for the courage of your convictions, and you need to refuse to say things that you don't believe in, and refuse to stand idly by while an organization tells the world that you believe things that you do not. In those cases, after deep and prayerful soul searching, it can sometimes mean breaking away. That's what the North American Unitarian Association has done, and that's why I applaud your courage. But I want to do more than just applaud you. I want to see if I can spell out just why your courage in this area is so important in the first place. First, you're showing your community, and you have members all over the globe, so this is a lot of communities, but you're showing your community and the Unitarian Universe Association more broadly that there's an alternative to critical theory and an alternative to so-called anti-racism. This matters. A lot of folks are drawn to anti-racism because they genuinely want to oppose racism, and they think that anti-racism is the only game in town. Anti-racists were really clever about what they named their ideology. I'm not saying they were nefarious, just they were smart. I mean, after all, who doesn't consider themselves to be anti-racism? Especially when people like Ibram X. Kendi stand up there and say that if you're not anti-racist, you must be pro-racist. There's only those two. Of course, Kendi's making a false dichotomy. And that's what you're showing the world, that there's more than one way to fight racism. And this matters because the uncomfortable truth is that critical theory and anti-racism, the ideology of Robin DiAngelo and of Ibram X. Kendi, and of so many others, actually doesn't work. It doesn't work to reduce racism. How do we know? Well, for one thing, Robin DiAngelo openly admits it. In an interview a year or two ago, she said that, quote, "I don't actually think I'm any less or more racist than anyone else, and that includes Donald Trump." Think about that. That's crazy, isn't it? DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility and several other books, has presumably been doing the work that she's telling us all of us to do, and she's presumably been doing it for decades. And after all of that time and all of that work, she still says that she's just as racist as anyone else. The truth is that for some critical theorists like DiAngelo, the world can never really get better. The thorny problems of our time can never really be solved. It's a hopeless and defeatist ideology. So why would we trust someone like DiAngelo to tell us how to fight racism? Look, if I had the flu, I wouldn't go to a doctor who had had a persistent flu for the past 30 years, and he told me that there's no good evidence that flus can ever be treated. It would be absurd. I would go to a doctor who actually knows how to combat the flu. Here's the truth. And here's the other way we know that anti-racism and critical theory actually don't work. In the past decade, since our society started to really adopt critical race theory and anti-racism, race relations have gotten way worse. In 2011, 65% of African Americans thought the relations between white and black people were, quote, very good or, quote, somewhat good. By 2021, that number would be cut in half, down to 33%. And it's no wonder, honestly. Critical theorists get on their bullhorns and they tell us that literally everything is racist. The copper penny is racist because it's darker than the other coins. That's a real example. I'm not making that up. Critical theorists say the SATs are racist. Modern medicine is supposedly racist. As the authors of one article in the peer-reviewed biology journal Cell wrote, quote, "Today, Black scientists continue to suffer institutional slavery." That's right, institutional slavery. Look, I'm not saying that racism has been fixed and is no longer a problem. But if you're saying that being a Black doctor in 2024 is just like being a slave working the cotton fields in the 1850s, you lost me. This strikes me as just a little bit of a stretch. And then, of course, critical theorists and anti-racists will insist that police have declared open season on African Americans. Insist this, thank God, without evidence. A recent study found almost half of liberals believe that between 1,000 and 10,000 unarmed African Americans are shot to death by police every single year. Well, thank God, the real number is far, far lower. The real number, about 17. When critical theorists paint this apocalyptic picture in which everything is racist and nothing is getting better and nothing can ever get better, is any wonder that African Americans are concluding that race relations are getting worse? This ideology just doesn't work. Anti-racism, what African American author and columnist Coleman Hughes actually calls, quote, neo-racism, also reifies and reinforces the distinctions between people of different skin colors. At many universities, Black and white students have different graduation ceremonies. There's a graduation ceremony for Black students, a graduation ceremony for Hispanic students, a graduation ceremony for Asian students. The underlying message is clear. We're separate people. We're too different to even go to the same graduation ceremonies, even when we graduate from the same school. Some anti-racists even oppose interracial dating. That was a real head scratcher for me. Wasn't one of the big goals of the civil rights movement to make a world where we could love and marry whoever we wanted without worrying about artificial distinctions like skin color? I always figured it didn't matter what your skin color was. What mattered was not how we look on the outside, but the deep and fundamental similarity we all share. We are all brothers and sisters, humans made in God's own image. But for a lot of anti-racists and a lot of critical theorists, that's just not how they see the world. The underlying theme of too many anti-racists and too many critical theorists seems to be this: the races are fundamentally separate. They are fundamentally distinct and never shall they meet. Or, that's not quite right. Let me put it a different way. They can meet, but only in narrow and tension-filled and stressful circumstances in which everyone walks on eggshells around everyone else. Does that sound like a vision for racial harmony to you? Because it doesn't to me. So if anti-racism and critical theory don't actually work to build the world of racial harmony, free from discrimination and prejudice that we're all yearning for, is there another idea that does? Yes. It's called liberal social justice. What is liberal social justice? Author Rio Veradonier describes it like this, quote, "Liberal social justice can be summed up as the belief in the equality of individuals, equal treatment under the law, regardless of sex, race, sexuality, gender identity, religion, etc." This is what social justice traditionally meant, and it was how most abolitionists, civil rights campaigners, and LGBT rights activists used and understood the term, despite some internal disagreements within these movements. That's Rio's definition of liberal social justice. Liberal social justice was what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about when he intoned, quote, "As I stand here and look out upon the thousands of Negro faces and the thousands of white faces, intermingled like the waters of a river, I see only one face, the face of the future." That's liberal social justice. Liberal social justice is what queer Black civil rights activist Pauli Murray advocated for in 1945, when it was not easy to be either queer or Black, when he said, quote, "I intend to destroy segregation by positive and embracing methods." When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. When they speak out for the privileges of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all mankind. That's liberal social justice. Liberal social justice works. It works beautifully. It's why we as society have progressed in a mere few decades from the days of Jim Crow to having an African-American president. It's why we've progressed from the bad old days when white people tossed the N-word around like it was candy to today, when you can get fired for making racist remarks to your black coworker, and justifiably so. It's why we as society have come so far, so quickly on gay rights. It's why a few decades ago, gay people were routinely smeared as pedophiles, including in government-sponsored PSAs, by the way. This was a very consistent narrative, very consistent myth. And now, just a few short decades later, gay marriage is the law of the land. Liberal social justice works. And it works for the precise reasons that Pauli Murray described. The truth is that as humans, we're wired for tribalism. As author and persuasion expert David McRaney wrote, quote, "We're a little bit pro-us and a lot anti-them." So when we see an out-group, we're wired on some level to want to exclude them. It's just how we work a lot of times, how our base psychology works. Liberal social justice bypasses that tribalist instinct by drawing a bigger circle to include the out-group. It doesn't tell us to think in terms of white Americans, black Americans, gay Americans, and straight Americans. It tells us to think in terms of all Americans. It doesn't ignore our differences, but it focuses our attention on our shared similarities. That's a powerful bonding agent. It's a powerful antidote to prejudice. Liberal social justice works. Anti-racism and critical theory don't. So how do we spread the message that liberal social justice actually works? Well, it takes something you all have. It takes courage. It took courage to split off from the Unitarian Universalist Association. It takes equal courage to stand up again and to talk about what you've learned with people who might not already agree with you. And courage is in short supply these days, no doubt about it. It's one of the things I write about perennially is our culture of walking on eggshells, our culture of being told, agree with me or be silent. Courage is in short supply. But you all have it. What is courage? Courage means choosing to follow our own discernment and our own convictions. Brene Brown says that to be courageous is, quote, to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. To have courage is to speak honestly and openly about our core convictions, and then to follow those convictions in search of a better world. That's what you're doing. That's the courage that the Hayward Fellowship of the North American Unitarian Association has shown. And you're having courage in a way that matters, in a fight that matters. One of the reasons that I care so much about this issue is that I was blessed to live in Kenya for a year, in most of 2022 and part of 2021. Nairobi, where I lived, is a cosmopolitan city, and our friend group comprised people from all over the globe. In our small Bible study, we had folks from Colorado and from Texas, from South Africa and from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from the Netherlands and from Nigeria. We had people of all different races, backgrounds, and walks of life. And we got along beautifully. We recognized each other's differences, but our friendship and love was built on a deep foundation of our shared humanity. We all realized that differences in skin color were only skin deep. They didn't matter. I'm not saying that Kenya or Nairobi is perfect. I don't think any human society is perfect. But our group represented the kind of racial harmony that I think we're all striving for. So after a year in Kenya, I came back to the United States, and it was jarring. I saw signs at my local elementary school offering different back-to-school nights for white parents and black parents. I saw a graduation ceremony segregating people by skin color. Two of my close friends in Kenya are a woman from the Philippines and a man from Nairobi. When they started dating, none of us thought anything of the fact that their skin colors were different. They're happily married now and trying to have what I have no doubt will be the world's most beautiful baby. But in the US, I saw anti-racist and critical theorist commentators casting suspicion on the whole idea of interracial marriage. As an article in Vice put it, quote, "If you're trying to start a mixed-race family, sit down and deeply interrogate your intentions." That's not progress, it's regression. It breaks my heart to see our great country being riven apart along racial and gender lines, to see us all becoming more divided, to see separate graduation ceremonies for people of different skin colors, to see books, New York Times bestselling books like Ijoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race, that insist that white people and black people's perspectives are so fundamentally and irreconcilably different that they can never really understand each other. It's as though they're different species. That vision of the world is not progress, it's regression. If some of the anti-racist commentators who have read, if they saw my friend group in Kenya with Nigerians and South Africans and folks from the US and folks from the Netherlands, all just hanging out, chatting about life and seeing each other as our brother and sister, I have no doubt they would label us problematic. But it's not too late to turn away from this regressive path that we're on. It's not too late to build a world of racial harmony. All it takes is something that you at the Hayward Fellowship of the North American Unitarian Association already have in spades. It takes courage. The courage to speak up. Because the honest truth and brutal truth is, this matters too much for us to be silent. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Julian.
Of course. I want to keep it a little bit short because Roy mentioned that he wanted to do a discussion afterwards.
Okay. And now we're going to have a closing song. So once again, please mute yourself and sing along to your heart's content. I think you'll recognize this one.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark.
At the end of the storm, there's a golden sky and a sweet silver song of a lark.
Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, for your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on, live hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll
Lavon, you ready?
Yes. Different yet united. We come from many places along different paths, bringing different truths. We come with different histories and different realities. And yet we come together as one people with faith that we can use our differences to heal ourselves and each other, to bring wholeness to a fractured world. We come seeking to find community, to find acceptance of who we are. In this place, we may find others who are much like us and others who are much different. May our lit chalice remind us that we are a people taught by different stories with many voices, but always one people working for a world where love creates justice and justice gives birth to peace.
Thanks,
All
Levon
right.
and Walt. Yeah.
Oh,
So, Doug, I guess we're ready for a Wild Rose.
we're ready to close out the service. So with a final piece of music. So you don't want to sing along with this, but this is kind of a calming piece of music.
Calming. What? Mute myself again?
Yep.